Have you ever experienced a moment where you had zero real power, where you were secretly consumed by helplessness, yet simply by standing tall and radiating absolute confidence, you forced the other side to step back? Have you ever had an instance where you weren't actually strong, but because you appeared to be, people blindly obeyed you? Human psychology is built upon a strange illusion. Most of the time, people do not purchase who you truly are. They buy what you appear to be.
Centuries ago, the Italian strategist Niccolò Machiavelli penned the most ruthless line in the history of power. It is far more useful to appear strong than to be strong, because people obey appearances. Today, I am taking you to the most daring, grandest stage in history, where this brutal principle was put to the test. 326 BC, at the edge of the known world, during Alexander the Great's campaign in India.
In his masterpiece, The Prince, Machiavelli argued that ruling is not a matter of morality, but an art of perception management. To him, the masses are superficial. They rarely question depth and instead surrender to the stage set before their eyes. Although Alexander the Great lived nearly 1800 years before Machiavelli, he carried this exact rule in his DNA. The young king who marched out of Macedonia, swallowed the Persian Empire, and brought the world to its knees, was now facing not just the brutal geography of India, but the absolute limits of his own army and the terrifying unknown. Alexander had defeated King Porus at the Battle of the Hydaspes, but that victory drained the very soul of the Macedonian army. Monsoonal rains fell relentlessly, rusting their armour and rotting their clothes. The men were terrified of exotic diseases, venomous snakes, and above all, the endless expanse of India stretching before them. The breaking point had arrived. The soldiers no longer wanted to march into death for Alexander. As Machiavelli noted, the moment a leader loses the illusion of absolute power, the obedience of the masses begins to shatter.
Upon reaching the banks of the Hyphasis River, the silent discontent erupted into open mutiny. Alexander's most loyal generals and veteran soldiers fell to their knees, weeping, declaring they could march no further. For the first time, Alexander had slammed into the unyielding wall of his own army's will. He retreated to his tent, refusing to speak to anyone for days. Yet he stood at a critical crossroads. If he forced them to march, he would be assassinated in a mutiny. If he turned back meekly, his image of invincibility would crumble forever. This is precisely what Machiavelli speaks of. Where physical power ends, the art of theatre must begin.
Alexander decided to retreat, but he could never frame it as a defeat or fear. He was a god king, and a god never flees. He hosted massive ceremonies honouring his heroes, offered sacrifices to the gods, and proclaimed to his troops that they had reached the very edge of the east. However, Alexander knew that the moment he turned his back, the surrounding local tribes, massive Indian kingdoms, and the vassals he left behind would perceive this retreat as fatal weakness. As he retreated like a wolf, he had to leave behind the shadow of a giant dragon. As the retreat commenced, Alexander did not meet with generals in his tent at night. He met with blacksmiths and carpenters. He initiated a legendary plan designed to blow up his exhausted, shrinking army into giant proportions inside the enemy's mind. Years later, Machiavelli would write, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." Alexander set out to design precisely what the enemy scouts would see.
Alexander gave strict orders to his blacksmiths. They were to forge bronze and iron armour, twice the size of a normal human being. Breastplates fit for 3-metre-tall giants, helmets double the size of a human head, and massive greaves were crafted. This armour was not made for battle. It was designed as a theatrical set piece to paralyse the enemy's imagination. The moment his physical army shrank, Alexander constructed a superhuman army inside the mind of his enemy.
It wasn't just the armour. Giant mangers and barracks equipment were constructed for the horses as well. Oversized bronze mangers, 3 times larger than normal, along with massive bits that looked as if they belonged to mythical war steeds, were manufactured. The soldiers' beds and tent poles were redesigned far beyond normal human scale. Machiavelli's rule of obedience to appearance was transforming into a lethal psycho-strategic weapon in Alexander's hands.
Alexander quietly marched his army out of the camp under the cover of night. But the camp they left behind was intentionally left uncleaned. Scattered across the ground were those oversized sets of armour, giant swords, superhuman horse mangers, and massive tent remains. As the campfires were still smoking, the Macedonian army retreated into the dark. Alexander never looked back because he knew his trap would work flawlessly.
The following morning, scouts from the local Indian tribes and regional kingdoms entered the abandoned Macedonian camp. They were horrified by the scene before them. As they lifted those massive sets of armour and tried to hold the giant swords, only one thought crossed their minds. What kind of monstrous creatures were we about to fight? What Alexander left behind was not just a camp, but a paralysing fear expanding rapidly inside the enemy's mind.
Not a single Indian kingdom or warrior tribe in the region dared to pursue the retreating Macedonian army. Without swinging a single sword, without losing a single soldier, Alexander preserved his regional dominance while retreating. Had he been honest and projected an image of "we are exhausted, reduced, and fleeing," the eastern tribes would have hunted them down. But thanks to the grand illusion of power, the enemy chose to thank the gods and retreat into their own fortresses rather than pursue.
Here, Machiavelli's philosophy fuses seamlessly with Alexander's genius. Machiavelli tells us, men in general judge more by the eyes than by the hands. The enemy scouts had touched that armour with their hands, yet the illusion seen by their eyes was so overwhelming that they failed to grasp a simple truth. The men who wore that armour were merely exhausted, normal humans marching away in the dark. Perception had crushed reality.
When Alexander returned to Babylon, this campaign was not told as a retreat, but as the triumph of a king who marched to the edge of the earth, confronted giants, and conquered the unknown. Alexander had successfully managed the illusion of power, not just against his enemies, but against the subjects of his own empire. Real power had wavered, but the unshakable nature of his image was enough to keep the empire intact. Yet this strategy carries a dark side. Machiavelli warns us, an illusion protects you for a while, but if you begin believing in your own illusion, your downfall is imminent. Alexander utilized the power of appearance brilliantly, but as he consumed his own divine image, his bond with his inner circle began to fracture. Appearing strong buys you time. Real power dictates how you use that time.
There is no difference between Alexander's giant armour and the political leaders, massive corporations, or individuals on social media we watch today. When leaders weaken, they erect grander buildings. When corporations edge near bankruptcy, they host their most extravagant launches. Because the system, much like the Indian scouts, is programmed to obey the signboards and the massive illusion presented to them.
If Alexander had admitted his weakness at the Hyphasis, his own generals would have overthrown him long before he ever reached Babylon. Machiavelli's core rule states, never display your weakness. Weakness invites cruelty. By hiding his vulnerability under massive bronze armour, Alexander intimidated not only his external enemies, but potential traitors within his own ranks.
What transpired on the muddy banks of the Hyphasis was less a military manoeuvre and more a masterclass in crowd psychology. Alexander proved a timeless truth. Sometimes the greatest victories are won not on the battlefield, but inside the fabricated reality you construct within your opponent's mind. Being strong is a capability, but appearing strong is an art.
In 326 BC, those giant sets of armour left in the mud of India remained as one of the greatest illusions in human history. Alexander died shortly after, but the image of the unbeatable giant he projected continued to govern empires for centuries. As our historical narrative concludes here, the legacy left behind by these two masterminds remains vibrantly alive.
Now let us close these dusty pages of history and look at our own lives. In your daily existence, your career, or your relationships, have there been moments where you felt utterly weak, yet by standing tall and forging your own giant armour, you claimed victory? Or did you honestly reveal your vulnerability, expecting mercy, only to pay the ultimate price with knives in your back, just like Julius Caesar? Machiavelli and Alexander whisper a cold reality to us. The world does not care about how sincere or honest you are on the inside. It only cares about the unyielding image you project outward.
In a world where appearance defeats reality, which side do you choose? Do you openly lay bare your vulnerabilities, or do you forge giant armour like Alexander and challenge the world? In your opinion, does appearing strong actually make you powerful? Or is it merely an illusion destined to end in disaster? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you don't want to miss deep historical analyses, power psychology, and strategic deep dives, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the Paradox of Power. Until the next analysis of power, stay sharp.